Thank you all for joining us. And I am Sue Kaufman. I'm the manager of the Clayton Library. And you are joining us today in Family History Month for our Wednesday edition of Clayton Library Presents. And we're going through Finding Your Female Ancestors today with our colleague here at the library, Rodney Sam. Before we get started, we are open for those of you that are first timers here with us, or if you need a reminder, if you're not, we are open 10 to 4, Tuesdays through Saturdays. Our phone number, if you are not in the area, 832-393-2600. We would love to talk to you and help you with your family history. Also, if you are interested in having us do presentations, there are a number of us that do presentations. You can call us and we can send our list of presentations to you. We would love to do that also. So today, Clayton Library Presents is Finding Your Female Ancestors with Rodney Sam. Rodney is a native of Opelousas, Louisiana, and grew up most of his life in Houston. He's been researching his family for over 20 years, and he currently works with us here at the library as a senior library service specialist. In his spare time, he enjoys reading, writing, music, and art. He's a proud graduate of Prairie View A&M, where he earned his bachelor's in arts and communication with a minor in musical performance. His genealogical research focuses on the history of African Americans and Louisiana Creoles, and last appeared on the Bernice Bennett Genealogy podcast in 2018 to discuss his lifelong interest in exploring his deep Louisiana roots. So Rodney, please take it away and tell us about finding female ancestors.
Hello, welcome everyone to my presentation today. I hope everyone is doing well. The name in the presentation here is called Finding Your Female Ancestors. And the reason why I created this presentation was because, as you know, in research and history, it's very difficult to find female ancestors in the past. Like the further you go back in time, the less information you have about like women. Usually you'll find more records about the men in their lives. So I wanted to kind of do this as an example to show how, do a case study, how you actually can find information about female ancestors through other people. So sometimes when you research, you might find something like this about women, like this census here. The census taker, he was too lazy to even list the name of the wives of everyone else. He just calls them madam. So you find examples like that. And sometimes you may find something like a marriage announcement where even though the names of the wife here, the maiden names, you'll find on the right where you'll see the women defined by their husband's last names instead of their actual maiden names. So you see examples like that, like our women are often like defined through the identities of their husbands or male spouses. So, and it's rare to find very detailed information, like unless someone was of historical significance. Like for example, this newspaper article mentions Helen Roberts because she was a teacher in the community and her husband was a known resident in the area. So you got a little more biographical detail about her because of what she done. Because if she was just a regular ordinary person, like a farmer or something, you might not see something like this. So that's kind of examples of what you may see in the records. And also you may find something like this, like this is an African-American cemetery. This is actually a family cemetery that this lady's buried in. And as you can see, she was likely born in slavery, and they have her where she was born and how old she was when she died. And here's a name called Bosco. So you may see things like that about like women, but it's very sporadic. So I wanted to kind of show, so in order to find records on women, I guess on your family, before you even go into records, I always recommend starting at home. Like just look in your houses, because usually from my experience, it seems that women are the ones who keep the photo albums and scrapbooks and family Bibles. Like they keep everything about people. They may keep obituaries, funeral programs, photographs, sometimes diaries if you're lucky that an ancestor wrote one. So I always tell people to kind of go into the personal records of the women in your family. Maybe it's your grandmother or aunt or that left a lot of records behind. You could just look through them and see what kind of clues, materials that they may have left about female relatives in the family. And like, for example, here, this is from my grandmother's, my paternal grandmother's photo album. When I open it up, she actually got a copy of her own christening in 1965. So this is a copy that she got. And when she had it, it gave the name of her parents and it gave the name of her godparents. So, and that's kind of one of many things that I found. I mean, I found obituaries of my great grandmother in my grandmother's album. So she had all this material in there just before I even got on Ancestry. So that's why I say it's important to kind of start at home and just begin where you are and then see what you can find. You know, and that's also public records where you can find women in my experience. So for example, death certificates can offer information women, like especially if you're able to say if you wanted to find out the maiden names of your female ancestors. So you would look for their kids and you would kind of see what was her name given and all the death certificates of the children. So it gives you hints on her origins and on her birthplaces. So a lot of times if you can't find a death certificate on a female ancestor, using her kids' information can help you zero in on where she could have been born and who her family could have been. And sometimes marriage license, they'll list sometimes the person who is a cosigner or a witness is a brother or uncle or any kind of male relative on her family. So, and sometimes they'll list parents. Service pension files are excellent because a lot of times a widow may submit a claim for a pension file. Or sometimes if she was a lady who claimed to be married to the soldier, a lot of times you have witnesses who knew her, or they may verify her relationship with them. And then even you'll see examples of marriage certificates provided. So those are very valuable. And wills and probates will also include. Sometimes they'll say she's a widow with so-and-so and she wanted to have like these people to be I guess the curator over account or someone to be guardian of her children. A lot of times you'll see women listed in there, usually, sometimes. And I've seen land deeds where sometimes a lady, she'll have a record of a piece of land that she's selling to someone, and she may say, Mary Johnson, widow of Samuel Johnson, is selling this property to so-and-so. Sometimes you see transactions like that. Or it may something like Mary Johnson selling property to so-and-so inherited from the property of her father. So you see things like that. And obituaries of funerals, of course, excellent. Especially if something was older. Obituaries are great because they'll list siblings, sometimes surviving relatives, that kind of thing. So that's really good, especially if she has a different surname than everyone else. So that could be helpful because you kind of build in a group of people that were affiliated with her. And church records, like especially if someone is a member of the Catholic faith, it'll list her parents, or godparents, or sometimes if her kids were baptized, the godparents of her could be her relatives. So that's also important to mention. So if someone's Catholic, it may be helpful for you as well. And census enumerations of male siblings. So sometimes if you ever looked into census and you don't know, and you're looking for a male ancestor, you don't know the maiden name of the wife, sometimes it's not unusual to have an in-law living with them. So you have an in-law and that person may be a brother-in-law. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the possible surname is of the female ancestor you're looking for. And court documents, of course, like divorce proceedings, people getting sued, things like that. A lot of times it'll mention somebody's stupid over in the state or that kind of thing. So that's important as well. And guardianship records are good. Like if someone was a minor and both the parents were deceased or one parent deceased, they had to appoint someone who was responsible for the child. A lot of times that was a male relative from her family. And also this is another one, a Social Security application. Forms is really good, like especially if someone lived long enough to apply for Social Security. Like if you was born in 1876 and you lived long enough to apply for Social Security, a lot of times what they put as the parents may be the only evidence of parents born before 1877 on there. So that's important as well. And this is an example kind of what I was saying about how you have to look at like this person here, Pierre Edward, Emily, and you see an in-law. So when you look at that, I use that to find a clue, like a marriage. So it definitely shows that Pierre Edward married her, and then the principal was Leonard LaChapelle. And it turned out that that was her father. So me just even looking at a basic census record gave me a clue to who her family belonged to, and that enabled me to kind of do some more, find him, and now learn more about her. So though things like that are just very valuable. So with that, and this is the bonus record. Sometimes this is the 1860 census. This is the census taker for some reason used the maiden names of all the women in the household. And that's very rare, so you can't expect that to happen. So that's why it's always good to look at different types of records, because you just never know what you may find, and you never know how detailed a census taker could be, because he had certain instructions. Sometimes certain guys, certain takers just put what they wanted and what they preferred, that kind of thing. So you get bonus information like that. Okay, so today I'm going to use an example. This is a case study of how I used these strategies to find information about a woman named Betty Williams, who is my maternal great-great-grandmother. So when I first started, she was the only thing I knew about her is she was born on the 7th of January in 1870 in Louisiana. She was African American. That she married my great grandfather Henry Thomas in 1892, and she died in 1925. And the family history is that she had a heart attack after going to a prayer meeting, and she's buried at the Baptist church. She only appears in 3 census years: 1900, 1910, and 1920. And I didn't find anyone of her name before that. I searched the entire parish of 1880 in DeSoto, and I didn't find her at all. No one with that name. And I could never find a death certificate. I've tried for years. So it was no death certificate, or maybe for some reason the family didn't report a death. So I didn't know too much about it. I didn't know anything about her background. And the only other piece of evidence besides this is we actually had a page from a family reunion that we attended probably over 20 years ago. And on this page was, I'm guessing, this history gathered from oral testimony that mentioned her brothers and her sisters. And as you can see, she has Williams near Johnson. So they both have the most common names in America. And also listed a sister. So considering when you're researching women, sometimes you have to kind of start with the people that you know. So this is all I had. So whenever you have situations like this, it's always best to start with build a fan club, build a cluster genealogy. If you ever heard of this, basically means in order to find out about an ancestor that's not a lot of information on directly, you have to study the people that were affiliated with them or people that they knew. And since these were the names that I had to work with from oral history, and since I didn't have a death certificate, I had no choice but to start with what I had. So I decided to try it out. So my first quest was, okay, who are Ursie Brantley and Mary Bell, her sisters, according to the family oral history? Could I find any evidence in public records to either show that they were her sisters or at least document their existence? So when I first started, I started with Ursie. Luckily, I went to familysearch.org and Ancestry. They both have a marriage index for Louisiana. And I found a Primus Brantley married to her, I guess it says Urch Williams, in 1895 in DeSoto Parish. So that's evidence, at least that was a woman associated with Brantley. So when I pulled up the actual record, this is what I saw: Mrs. Ursie Williams married Primus Brantley, and there's Henry Thomas, which was the name of my great grandfather. So that at least tells me that she probably was her sister, and there's definitely an association that makes me think. So that's a potential lead. So, and then I'm like, okay, so that seems to be something. And then I decided to look up Mary Bell. I'm sorry. So I looked up Ursie Brantley in the census. So this is the 1900 census. And as you can see, she's living in the household as a boarder of a man named Bertie Johnson. And next to her is a woman named Fanny Darby. So she's married, but I don't see Primus, but the name is pretty distinct, Ursie Brantley. So that's her there. And what's interesting about this is that I found her again in the 1900 census. And this time she's a head of household. with her kids, living next door to that Fanny Darby that was with her as a head. And I found her again, Fanny, 3 times. I've never found someone 3 times in a census. And this time there's a George, there's a Fanny, and there's all the sons in the household correspond with the other sons. That's how I know it's the same person. So for some reason, I got a hunch, I got curious about this Fanny Darby. Like, was there a connection to Elsie? And could she be of some kind of relation? So of course, I went on Ancestry again through the Louisiana Death Indexes, and I found the marriage of Franny is really Fanny, married to George Darby, 1880 in DeSoto Parish. So her maiden name was Thomas. Now, was she the mother of Ursie Betty? I'm not sure, but it certainly was interesting. And so I just got curious about Fanny. So I found Fanny in the 1910 census. This time she's Fanny Darby as a widow, and she's living with several kids. And I noticed this woman named Leela as the daughter, and I tracked her forward in time, and I found her as Lena Scott, living with her mother, Fanny Darby. And so I was like, okay, what else can I find? So I kept going, and ultimately found her death certificate. And as you can see, it confirmed her mother as Fanny Thomas. I don't know who George Mims is, but it's not George Darby. I'm not sure whether that's a mistake or error, but at least show that her mother was Fanny Thomas, and the informant was Ethel Davis. And so I tracked Ethel Davis, and I found that Lee Ethel Davis, Lena Scott, the Davises. So they're all buried together. So at least kind of shows that she was the mother of at least one of these women. So then after that, I was like, okay, Mary Bell. I found a death certificate of a lady named Mary Bell who died in Mansfield, Louisiana. And as you can see, it lists 2 parents, Ned Williams and Fanny. So out of these 2 women that I found, I discovered that both of them were affiliated with the name Williams, and at least one of them was connected to a lady named Fanny, or at least 2. So that kind of suggests to me that maybe Fanny was the mother of Ursie and maybe my ancestor, maybe. So I looked up Bell, and I found Magnus Bell and Mary. I can't say his name, but that's what it looks like to me. And the woman named Hattie was actually the informant for her death. So that tells me that, you know, it's a possible connection. Mary is associated with the name Williams. So that's good. So the next step after that, I decided to go for the brothers, Anthony, Tom, Wyatt, and Ellis. Now, knowing that the fact that they're Johnsons, it was dozens of connections. So I expected that with a name like Tom Anthony, you were going to find 1 person, 2 persons. So it's always a frustrating experience. So because of that, I just kind of left it alone for a while, because like I said, it was, I didn't have much to go on, you know, until searches for Ellis and Wyatt also turned negative. I didn't find anything on them. I didn't find a single individual with those names, no marriages, no death certificate. It was like they didn't exist. So I started to question the oral history. Like, did these men even exist? And were their names even Johnson, for all that matters? So because I couldn't find anything else after that, I just left it alone for a few years, and until this technology called commercial DNA came in. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping. So the conclusions that I got just from that was Ursie was definitely Williams. She married a named Promise Brantley, and that was a Mary Bell connected to a Williams. And it kind of suggested that Betty Williams' parents may be Ned and Fanny, but the evidence to me wasn't strong enough to show a connection. And as I mentioned earlier, there was no one named Ellis or Wyatt in the census, marriage, no death certificates at all. But there were several dozen men named Tom and Anthony Johnson, because those names are pretty common. And that's when I kind of started to, you know, question oral history. Like, is it true? why were her brothers Johnsons and Betty was Williams, and were they really Johnsons? So I waited until, so I decided to define the problem. Like, I wanted to know, who were the parents of Betty Williams? Were they Ned Williams and Fanny? Who were the Johnson brothers? How did they fit into the puzzle of her origins? So I needed a strategy. And at the time, that wasn't DNA yet. So when commercial DNA testing entered the scene, I decided to submit my DNA and asked my mother to do it. So, and my great aunt also did it. She was the last living sibling of my grandmother. So when I did it, it definitely confirmed that I do in fact descend from Henry Thomas and Betty Williams. We had multiple DNA matches that came from all their children. I mean, they had like 12 children, so it was enough descendants to go around. And when I looked at all the matches, I saw that we did have people who were rooted in DeSoto Parish, but with names that I wasn't familiar with. But I'm pretty sure that they had to have been connected to us somehow. And I felt that my aunt, being the last living sibling, was the best candidate, since Betty Williams would be her grandmother. So her great grandmother would be part of the mystery. Well, great grandparents would be part of the mystery that I'm trying to solve, the mystery family. So that's what I did. So when I submitted the DNA, I noticed that several people were descended from a man named Anthony Johnson from DeSoto Parish. And this time I was able to zero in. And what I found out is he was born between 1873 1876 and married Annie Jackson in 1896 in Mansfield. And he had children by, two different women. Florence was one of them. And the descendants of her and his wife and Annie all share DNA with us. And when I found his death certificate, he listed his parents as Peter Johnson and Ruthie Henderson. Now, when I got that, it made me wonder if Fanny was really her mother, because if Anthony Johnson is her brother, then Fanny couldn't have been her mother. And and also when I talked to my Aunt Mildred, she confirmed that her grandmother did have Brantley cousins. And then she reaffirmed that Anthony Johnson was her grandmother's brother. So that was definitely some oral history to at least corroborate what the DNA was bringing to me. So this Anthony Johnson is, probably her brother. So I decided to learn more about Anthony. So I pulled up the 1900 census, and there he was, Anthony Johnson with Annie, living with someone named Ben Stanley, who's a nephew. I didn't know who that was. It was two possibilities. Either he can be his father or mother could be the sibling of Anthony, or it could be Annie. So I decided to focus on Ben. As always with these research, one step leads to another, to a journey. So I looked up Ben, and I found him in 1910, living with a man named Ellis Stanley. Now, if you remember from the list I showed you, Betty was said to have a brother named Ellis Johnson. And I also said that I couldn't find a man named Ellis Johnson, but his individual named Ellis Stanley. So I wondered, could Ellis Stanley be the brother of Anthony Johnson? Well, when I pulled up his marriage, Anthony Johnson was a witness, and there was a man named Irvin Henderson. So that definitely kind of added some strength to that. Perhaps they were brothers. Anthony Johnson and Ellis Stanley were brothers, perhaps. But I wasn't quite satisfied. So with this new information, I concluded Anthony Johnson appears to be related to Ellis Stanley, and both are old enough to be brothers. And Anthony identified his mother as Ruthie Henderson and father as Peter Johnson. And the family did say that Betty had brothers named Ellis, Anthony, White, and Tom. So could Ellis be Ellis Stanley? And then there's a man named Irvin Henderson. He used the same name as Ruthie. Could they be cousins? And unfortunately, when I tracked Ellis Stanley's death certificate, he only listed his father as a man named Billy Stanley, but no mother listed. So it's a possibility, but it's not 100%. So, but I feel like I'm on the right track. I'm getting close. So I started to wonder, who is Ruthie Henderson? Like, to me, I felt she was like the clue to the puzzle, because this was Anthony Johnson's mother, and and Betty was supposed to be her brother, but they couldn't have the same father since he's a Johnson and she's a Williams. So they had to at least share one parent, and maybe it's the mother. So on a whim, I decided to search, go on family search, and search through the marriage indexes for DeSoto Parish. And I found a single marriage for a lady named Ruthie Henderson to a man named William Cato Jr. on December 10th, 1875. Could she be Anthony's and perhaps the mother of Ellis and Betty? So considering I didn't know, I haven't seen any other Ruthie Henderson, and I felt it wouldn't hurt to look. So I decided to look for William Cato in the 1880 census. And when I saw this, I gasped, my eyes just popped out of my head. I was like, there's Ruthie, there's Betty, and there's an Anthony. Betty is old enough to be Betty Williams. Anthony's age is right where it would be. And both of them were born before her marriage to William Cato. So when I saw this, like, oh my God, this has to be the person here. So yeah, I was happy. Sometimes when you find new discoveries, you just get excited. So when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the missing Betty. This is probably why I couldn't find her. But the journey wasn't over. I had to keep going. So I looked through my great aunt's Aunt Mildred's DNA results. And when I was comparing her to list of people who descend from Anthony Johnson, that was this really high DNA match that showed up as second or third cousin. And at the time, he didn't have a family tree yet, but I went ahead and emailed him just to see, tell him like where your family's from. And eventually, like he told me that he was the great grandson of a man named Wyatt Cato. I'm like, and I wondered, Wyatt Cato? Could Wyatt Cato be the son of Ruthie? Okay, so I got curious, and I started to look up Wyatt Cato, because in order for them to be second and third cousins, that means that Wyatt and Betty had to have a common ancestor, or at least with my aunt. So I started to look up Wyatt Cato, and look what I found. When he filled out a Social Security application claim, he listed his mother as Ruthie Henderson and father as Roland Cato. Turns out William also was William Roland Cato, but the fact that Ruthie was the mother, that kind of just blew everything up. And that basically told me that, and I remember that one of the siblings was a man named Wyatt Johnson. So could Wyatt Johnson be Wyatt Cato? So I decided to look up Wyatt, found his marriage. I went to Family Search. They have a really good database for DeSoto Parish indexes and marriages. And when I found his marriage to Savannah Hall, guess who was the witness? Anthony Johnson. So that made me think that perhaps Wyatt Johnson is really Wyatt Cato, and Ellis Stanley is probably Ellis Johnson, and Anthony Johnson is Anthony Johnson. So I was pretty excited. And then when I looked up Irvin Johnson, that's the guy I mentioned earlier, as a witness. So I looked him up, and you'll see a little kid named Irvin Johnson living with an Henderson. And then right next door is an older guy named Lawrence Henderson, age 51. And if you notice, there's a little kid named Ellis, 14, which is about the age that Ellis Stanley would be. And also you would notice that there's also Wyatt that's 16, and there's also Betty that's 18. Coincidentally, these are the names of Betty Williams and Ellis Stanley. So it makes you wonder if was there some kind of naming pattern. So when I did that, I just kind of looked up Anderson, and I found this 1870, and there's Ruthie Henderson, age 24, with Anderson. There's a sister named Elizabeth, Anthony, Wyatt, and Ellis. All these names are the names of all my ancestors' brothers. So it made me wonder, did Ruthie name all her children after her siblings? And because I was able to kind of go back a generation. So my new conclusions from after all this was that Betty Williams Thomas was the daughter of Ned Williams and Ruthie Henderson. Her sisters were indeed Ursie and Mary, and her brothers were Wyatt Cato, Ellis Stanley, and Anthony Johnson. And neither were their parents married. So that's what made it challenging, because her parents weren't married to each other. So it made it harder for me to find them. And I learned that Ruthie was born in Alabama before the Civil War, and her parents were likely Lawrence and Elvina. So basically, through the combination of using oral testimony and questioning it, public documents and DNA, I mean, it helped me identify Betty Williams' background, at least her parents and where she came from. So it took a lot. It was very difficult and very challenging, and I'm just glad that DNA enabled me to do it. And also, it made me realize that oral history isn't something that's written on stone. You have to really question it. And I don't know how all those kids became Johnson, but that's what happened. And to further confirm that I'm on the right track, there were other DNA matches that descended from Irvin Henderson, and also matches that descended from, guess who? Ellis Stanley. So I was on the right track, and the DNA seems to support the research that I did looking. So now I have her family. So, and there's one brother, I forgot the Tom Johnson. I mentioned him. I couldn't find anything on him. Well, when I was looking through the marriages, I decided to try something. Let's look up Tom Williams. So I tried the name Tom Williams, and this is what I came up with. There's a marriage of Tom Williams to Sarah Ann Pegues, and look who were the witnesses. There's I guess a Marlon Bell and a Mary Bell. Remember that Mary Williams married was with a Bell. So the fact that these two are together tells me that this maybe Tom Johnson is actually Tom Williams. Maybe it creates more questions than answers, but it definitely reveals something that I wasn't aware of before. So after looking at all this, learning about Betty's family, finally discovering after, gosh, almost 20 years of researching, I decided to revisit some of the census of my great grandmother. So when I did that, I found Henry Thomas and Betty, and noticed that right next to my great grandmother was a sister named Ruthie. And Ruthie died young according to family, but she named her after her grandmother. And this has been sitting under my nose the whole time, and I had no idea. So this is kind of an example of what it takes to find information about female ancestry, especially if someone was African American, born in 1870, whose parents were never married to each other, whose children didn't live all in the same households. Because I really think Ellis was raised by his grandparents. So this is an example of how I managed to do that about people who didn't leave, to the example of what I did. So I hope you enjoy my presentation. Hopefully it's informative. If I was nervous, I'm sorry. So thank you very much. Okay.
Rodney, that was very, very, very wonderful. What I would like to mention is, first of all, your gifts and your animations were really added a lot to the presentation, but that's just an aside. The information was what was important. You talked about, strategy and having conversations, and then at the end, how you came back and reevaluated what it was that you had, and re-looked at it. Can you talk about a little bit about planning strategy and having conversations, and then researching what you already have?
Oh, you mean like, let's just, well, yeah, well, after I did the DNA, I had to figure out something like, I had to form, you got to have a question. So you can't solve anything if you don't know what you're looking for. So it's very important to form an idea, like, what am I looking for? And then what do I need in order to, like, what kind of data do I have to collect? So I talked to my aunt, and like I said, she said, hey, yeah, my grandmother did have a brother named Anthony, and we were related to Brantley. So that kind of told me that something supported that story. So that was kind of like the first strategy, oral history. And then I had to I had to re-examine what I thought I knew. And that's kind of what happened. I re-examined the oral history and I realized, okay, these surnames are not matching up. Something's going on with this, right? And so I did that. I had to kind of think outside the box a little bit, because in order to define what sign, I had to like question things that I thought were like true. So I started with the strategy. I was kind of like use what I needed to do and then just took it from there. And I had to like constantly re-examine old records that I had outside of discovering new records. So it took a lot of interpretation, and it was some work. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No,
Yeah.
it did. I mean, just you mentioned, the importance of re-examining and also re-examining not only the documents, but the assumptions that you already had,
Mhm.
and then talking to people, and then maybe talking to people more than once, because once you start a conversation, maybe somebody will remember something another time. So there's a lot of strategies that went into it. And, like you mentioned, coming out of the box, thinking out of the box, because going in with assumptions can sort of put you in a box, right?
Yeah, that's what
So
made it
just
happen.
looking at that.
Yeah, it got
So
complicated because, as you can see, the different fathers, and one person married to another, and people living in different households. And so yeah, it got complicated. So I had to like question it, because I had a wrong assumption. I had assumed that her mother was Fanny at first, until one day
mhm,
those DNA tests, it was just bugging me. I was like, okay, something's not right about this. And that's when I started. So yeah.
right. So great. Mitch, so let's bring on Mitch. And Mitch, are there any questions in the chat?
Are there any questions? There's quite a few questions here.
Okay.
Let me go ahead and get started. Hey, Rodney, you want to turn your camera on?
Oh, okay. Let me do that. So
If I have to turn mine on, you get to turn yours on.
That's not fair. Okay, hold on. Let me find my camera. Hold on. Well, what's the question while I'm
That's okay. Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Well, okay. First of all,
doing this?
first question we have
Okay.
is from Kim, and Kim asks, "Did all the 1860 U.S. Census records record women's maiden names, or was that unique to St. Landry Parish, Louisiana?"
I think that was just one thing that had just one census taker in one place at the time. For some reason, that particular census taker decided to record the maiden name. So I don't know whether that happened everywhere else, but I know just for that particular thing, he just got lucky. He just happened to do that. And I mean, he even listed the specific birthplaces of some people too.
Wow.
So this particular guy, for whatever reason, he was very detail oriented. So he
Maybe
did
he
a
was
little more. Yeah.
maybe he was a genealogist. Yeah.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
haven't seen that before.
yeah, he had the
Yeah.
parishes, and he
Mhm.
lists the parish and sometimes the city of the people. So I've never
Oh,
seen that on the
nice.
census. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's unique. I think it's just the quirk of that particular census taker. So.
Okay. Okay. So I have a question from Brenda. Brenda is referring to the Fanny Darby census that
Mm-hmm.
shows that she is a widow. She asks, "Have you
Mm-hmm.
found that when females are separated, divorced, or whatever, it shows them as widowed?" Brenda says that she's seen the term widow come up even though she can find the male spouse alive in another
Mm-hmm.
census during the same time. So have you found that sometimes they used widow when separated or divorced might have been
Oh yeah,
correct?
that happened with my great grandparents. My uncle told me that his grandmother could no longer stand his grandfather, so they split. And in 1910, she's a widow. In 1910, he's a widow, and they're both very much alive. So yeah, so yes. So you can't
Yeah.
assume that just because someone's a widow doesn't mean they're dead. I mean, being divorced was kind of like a more of a stigma back then than it is now. So a lot of times people just said they would rather say their spouse was dead and rather than being divorced. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I have a question from Geneva. Geneva is asking a technical question. Geneva wants to know, how do you begin to read some of the documents that you were showing? The handwriting is very difficult. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to interpret these documents?
I mean, I didn't think they were particularly difficult myself, but I mean, I didn't think they were particularly difficult, but well, as far as that census, the one that was kind of faded was pretty bad. Well, I know on Ancestry, they have this tool where you can reverse the image where it becomes
Mhm.
like black and white. So you can try that. Well, I've seen that too, where it makes it easier to see faded out census images.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's what I did when I looked at one of those 1900 census, because it was very faded. So I had to
Mhm.
really analyze. So I kind of used that tool to reverse it. And then
I've done that too, yeah.
and then sometimes there are transcriptions in the of it, but sometimes the transcriptions are incorrect too. So I always have to like look at it really carefully. And then if you know the family, you pretty much kind of have an idea of who they are anyway. So I would say that. So I mean, some of them can be difficult, especially when you go into like wills and stuff. People's handwritings are horrible. So
Sure. Sure.
so, yeah.
Okay. So I have a question from Brenda. Brenda asks, can you explain how the DNA tests work? In order to find a match, that's a big question, I know. In
Yeah.
order to find a match, some other descendant would also have had a DNA test. Is that what you're looking at?
I mean, well, when you test, I'm not a geneticist, but when you test your DNA, it just compares you to people who have tested in the system. And if you share genes with them, then you're genetic related. So the one I mentioned, the guy with the Cato, he just so happened to test, and he just happened to share a lot of DNA with my aunt. I felt was pretty significant.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just like sometimes people don't test. I mean, sometimes it takes the right person to test. So, I mean, like I said, that's pretty much how it works. It just finds people who share DNA with you. And if, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's kind of a huge question. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, basically, yeah, that's right. So
Mhm.
Charlotte has kind of a comment, and maybe you can comment on this as well.
Okay.
Charlotte, you said you asked at one point how everybody became Johnson. Charlotte
Yeah.
says that their cousin had many children out of wedlock before the mother married Mr. Brown. He changed all the children to Mr. Brown's name. So she documented in her genealogy software that the kids didn't really know their father's real name. Do you run into something like that where kids or families' names change?
Yeah, and certain side of the family, definitely a case. I mean, and I just showed an example of that. Like I actually know all the fathers. I found all the fathers too in the census. Every last father, I found them all. Yeah. Peter Johnson was right down the road from William Cato, so you probably knew his dad. And William Stanley is in 1870, and Ned shows up later on in 1880. So yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of times, if children, they use the names of their adopted father, sometimes they use the name of the father, something they didn't know. So I mean, I've
Mhm.
seen records where one guy, I think the mother she got married, and then her husband died when she was pregnant. So before she had the baby, she got remarried, and the kid took the name of switches between the stepfather, this time his biological father. So yeah, I mean, yeah, and sometimes when people are born out of wedlock, a lot of times those names are going to be very flexible. So a lot of times they're going to use their mother's name or sometimes a stepfather. So in this case, I don't know how they became Johnsons. Maybe they assumed that because Anthony was a Johnson, that Ellis and Wyatt were Johnsons, but it turned out they all had completely different surnames. And then when I looked up my great grandmother's brother, he wrote his mother's name as Betty Stanley. So I knew I was kind of on the right track. So maybe he was kind of not sure, or so that kind of stuff. So since, like I said, because she was born out of wedlock, really, and none of her parents were married. So yeah.
Mhm. Okay. So I have a question from Geneva. Geneva says, does it get more complicated when your family has migrated from another country? Would these same resources still work?
I mean, it could still work, but you just have to. It's just your research is going to be international. So you're going to be looking at records from overseas and records from America. So it all depends on how long they've been here. So I
Mhm.
mean, if they've been here for several generations, like 1800s, it may be a little easier because people are more settled. But if someone came maybe like within the last 80 years, 100 years, it might be a little more challenging because you're going to find yourself researching other countries, or in some of your DNA matches maybe people from other regions. So So yeah, that's pretty much my perspective on it. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask you how many counties was this family that you were researching, were they spread out very far, or were they fairly tight knit?
Very fortunately, they were all in the same parish. They were just in different wards. So
Okay.
luckily they didn't move around too much. They might have moved to the next community 20 miles here and there. So luckily they all stayed in one place. So except I think they just live in different communities. So yeah, I think that's what made this helpful. Now, if the siblings were in different states, or it would have been a little more complicated. So I was kind of very lucky on that. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me see if I think I have a couple other questions that have popped up here. Dawn has a kind of a question and a comment. Dawn, first of all, says excellent presentation. Slavery separated families, which lends to a different family dynamic. Last names as well as errors in spelling by the census takers. Any help to manage the frustration? So how do you get around some of the things that are kind of built into researching African-American families?
That's kind of a tricky name. First of all, like surnames are not as consistent. They're going to vary. So you have to always expect that surnames are going to vary. In mind, you have to be mindful of that. And so you're dealing with something like that, you kind of have to focus on sometimes first names. Like I couldn't find some relative in 1880 because they were in the census in 1870 under a different last name. So you kind of have to look at really the whole family. That's kind of how you get around it. You're some people who were former slaves. You have to research the whole family. You have to kind of build their group together. That way, instead of following one person here and go that person, you have a harder time. So I think in my case, I avoided by kind of reconstructing the entire community of people, like trying to find siblings or cousins of people who were former slaves. And that's kind of what helped me trace my family history to like pre-Civil War to my ancestors who actually were slaves. Learning about people in the post-war kind of helped. And then a lot of them all had different surnames. Full siblings had different surnames because you don't know who they took the name from. It could have been from the father, it could have been a previous slave owner, or they could have chosen the name together. So that's what I come across a lot. Yeah. So,
well, you just said, but I was going to wrap it up with a comment here from another person that said that it looks like you can't look for your female ancestors without looking into it all as a whole, which is what you just said.
Yeah,
you have to take the whole family.
Yeah, you have to look at everything. I mean, like I looked at for my case, it was like marriage records. I got lucky. It was really just marriage and then the census and death certificates. But I had to like analyze the stuff too. So it's kind of like I had to analyze it. So that's what kind of made it. And DNA really was the one that kind of sealed it for me. DNA basically just kind of helped put everything together. So yeah, you have it's complicated, like I said, because women are harder to find. So a lot of times you have to trace the men that were connected to them, and plus a lot of men created records. So a lot of times you have to do that, unless a female's ancestor was very prominent or something like that. You won't find a lot. So especially if there are people who were members of like marginalized groups, like if you was a slave or like that makes it even harder. So you have to really have a holistic picture of like of doing it. So yeah.
Yeah. Natalie came across with a comment here, just I guess referring back to the question about putting together families that migrated from other countries. Natalie says that you have to know the village where your ancestors immigrated from. So look for obituaries, church records, death certificates, tombstones, etc. in the US where your ancestor lived. And Natalie also suggests looking at ethnic newspapers. I know that a lot can be found in ethnic newspapers, but it's a lot of work because they're usually not in English. And so for most of us, that is a hamper, but there is information there.
Oh yeah, those are good tips. I mean, it's kind of like similar to what I did, except hers is international focus. So yeah. So yeah, because like I said, only evidence of my ancestor's death was her tombstone, 1925, no death certificate. I looked for 20 years, couldn't find out. So I was like almost kind of gave up on it. But yeah, so that's good advice for yeah.
And I just wanted to mention before we toss it back to Sue that there was not a handout today, but we do expect one in the near future, and we'll be sending those out to everybody.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm gonna create one.
Yeah. Definitely want to get all this information to everybody. So Sue, we'll turn it back over to you. Thank you. Thank you, Rodney.
Thanks, Mitch, and thanks, Rodney, and thanks for everybody's comments in the chat. We really like sort of that interaction that goes back and forth. There's knowledge base from our presenters, there's knowledge base in the chats. And Rodney, thank you so much for a very interesting and thorough presentation of, and just the idea of evaluating and the whole community and everything was really
Thanks. I
a
was
lot of information.
super nervous.
You did a great job, Rodney. You did a fine job.
All right.
So thank you all for joining us, and we invite you for this coming Friday at 2:00. We have Did I Get Everything? Creating a Checklist for Genealogy Research with Thomas McEntee, who is entertaining also. So please do feel free to join us this Friday, and then any other upcoming events that we do have, registering as you did for today, houstonlibrary.org, click on events. Rodney, thank you again so much for your knowledge and sharing, and we appreciate it. And thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time.